The call came in at 2:11 a.m., thin and metallic through the county radio. A male voice, breathless. Lights moving at the old quarry. Someone's out there. Then the line broke into static. I told myself it was kids. Drunk, bored, shining flashlights at moths. That's what I said out loud, like practice for the report I hoped to write later. But my hands still tightened on the wheel as I took the dirt road past mile marker 8. The washboard rattle climbed into my teeth. Sagebrush scraped both doors like fingernails. The quarry sits in a wind bowl outside Sandrock, shut down after a wall sheared and took 3 men with it. 15 years, and the fence still leans at the exact angle of bad posture. My headlights fell across a single car just beyond the gate. Engine running. Driver's door open. No driver. I pulled in behind it and stepped out. Cold air bit the wet in my eyes. The engine idled with a lazy cough, warm air from the vents, turning the windshield cloudy in a slow bloom. A cell phone vibrated on the passenger seat, screen lighting the interior in pulses like a heartbeat. No name, no photo, just incoming. Sandrock Sheriff, I called into the dark. Call out. Wind took the words and pushed them back at me, thinner. Somewhere deep, stone pinged. Water, maybe. Or a boot. I don't scare easy. 32 years irons that out of you. But the quiet had a shape to it. Like a room with furniture you couldn't see. My flashlight cut a tunnel through dust. Boot prints led past the sagging gate, fresh enough that the edges hadn't sloughed. Size 11, maybe 12. Heel wear on the outside. Someone who leans. I followed, telling myself I was just verifying. Just keeping the paperwork simple. My breath made a cloud that drifted and vanished like it had someplace else to be. Behind me, the unattended engine kept idling. In front of me, the quarry swallowed sound. I was 3 weeks from retirement. 32 years wearing the badge, and all I wanted was to make it out without another midnight call like this. But I knew this place too well. 15 years back, I'd been here when the wall collapsed. 3 men gone in a heartbeat, their bodies dug out 2 days later. And before that, long before, the disappearance of a kid named Travis Hill. 17 years old. Last seen on a dare to touch the quarry water. We searched for a week. Found nothing. His mother still leaves a candle at the fence post every year. I stopped at the gate. The metal chain clinked against the post in the wind. My flashlight beam skated across the rock face. Fine powder drifted in the air, catching the light like falling ash. There was a rhythm to the night sounds. Wind, loose gravel shifting the creak of the chain. Then a new sound. Metal against stone. Sharp. Intentional. I crouched, sweeping the light along the ground. That's when I noticed something odd. Small bits of polished metal wedged into cracks in the stone. Little chips, barely visible unless the light hit them just right. Like someone had been marking a path. I touched one. Cold. Set deep. Whoever put them there wanted them to last. The boot prints led deeper, zigzagging between rock mounds. I kept the flashlight low, and my other hand near the grip of my sidearm. The radio on my shoulder popped with static. First I thought it was wind noise. Then, just for a second, I heard it. A voice. Low. Almost like it was inside the static. More ahead. I froze. My thumb hovered over the transmit button, but I didn't press it. I know the other deputies. None of them sound like that. And nobody should be using this frequency without a badge. 100 feet in, I found a half-empty bottle of water perched neatly on a flat rock. The cap sat beside it. Condensation beaded on the plastic, and when I touched it, it was cold enough to sting my fingertips. Someone had been here minutes ago. The quarry walls closed and the farther I went. The air cooled, dry enough to chap my lips. Every step echoed twice. Once for my boots, and again, softer. Like someone else following just out of sync. I should have turned back, called in backup. But something about the trail felt prepared. Like whoever made it wanted me to keep going. The trail funneled me toward a narrow cut in the rock, barely wide enough to squeeze through without turning sideways. On the other side, the quarry opened into a hollowed basin. The moon hung low over the rim, its light fractured by dust drifting in the air. I moved slow. My flashlight swept over piles of rubble and rusted equipment, every shadow holding its breath. That's when I noticed it. Mirrored glints in the walls. More metal fragments, spaced just far enough apart to lead my eyes forward. My radio hissed again. This time no words, just a short burst, like someone clicking the transmit button without speaking. I keyed mine and kept my voice even. "This is Sheriff Ethan M., Sandrock County. Identify yourself," static answered, long and patient. My pulse pressed against my ears. I knew better than to chase shadows, but each metallic marker felt like a breadcrumb. Each one I passed made it harder to justify turning back. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent, earthy, damp, but with a metallic tang, like old blood on steel. A sound followed, not wind, not rockfall, a deliberate tap, tap, tap. It came from deep inside a tunnel mouth ahead, the darkness thick as tar. I stepped closer, light cutting into the entrance. The air changed, cooler, stiller. My boots scuffed fine gravel that crunched like bone underfoot. Halfway in, my beam caught something lying on the ground. A flashlight. Its lens cracked, casing scuffed. I crouched to pick it up, brushing off grit. That's when I saw the smear on the floor beside it. A crescent of dark red, still wet enough to glisten. A single drop fell from somewhere above, hitting my hand. Warm. I jerked the light upward, but the beam met nothing but rough stone. Yet I couldn't shake the certainty that someone was standing just beyond the edge of my light. From deeper in the tunnel came another sound. A faint scrape, followed by the distinct, slow rhythm of footsteps. Retreating, but not hurried. Leading me on. I took one step forward, then another. The echo folded around me like the walls were closing in. My breathing turned shallow, each inhale pulling in the dust that tasted like rust. I realized then, I wasn't just tracking someone, I was being drawn. The tunnel narrowed until my shoulders brushed stone on both sides. My flashlight beam wavered with each heartbeat. Then, silence. The footsteps had stopped. I listened so hard my ears rang. Nothing but the slow drip of water somewhere ahead. I took another step. That's when it came. A single, deliberate footfall behind me. Close. Too close. I spun, light slicing through the dust. Empty passage. But on the ground, just inches from my boot, lay a metal badge. Not mine. It was the volunteer deputy's. The same man who'd called in the report. Fresh blood smeared one corner, still tacky under my thumb. I turned back toward the darkness ahead. A flicker of movement broke the black. Not in the tunnel itself, but on the walls. Reflections dancing across the stone, like someone was signaling with mirrors. I moved toward it, beam searching for the source. The light suddenly flared, blinding white that punched into my eyes and burned shapes onto my vision. I stumbled, raising a hand to block it. In that flash, I saw the figure. Tall, hooded, still as carved rock. No sound, no face visible. Only the slow tilt of the head, like they were studying me. And then they stepped back into the dark, vanishing without a sound. A scraping noise started up ahead, steady and heavy, like something being dragged across stone. It faded deeper into the tunnels until the only thing left was the drip of water and the pounding in my skull. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cold air, every instinct telling me I'd followed far enough. But the trail wasn't finished. I backed out of the tunnel, slow, keeping my light aimed at the black behind me. No footsteps followed. No voice on the radio. Just the hollow quiet of a place that wanted me to leave. Outside, the night air felt warmer, but my skin was clammy, shirt clinging to my back. The car I'd found still idled by the gate. I opened the driver's door. The cell phone was gone. On the seat, where it had been, lay a sealed manila envelope. No markings. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. A hand-drawn map of the quarry. It showed the exact route I'd taken. Every turn. Every pause. Even the spot where I'd found the flashlight and the smear of blood. Each was marked with a small red circle. At the end of the route, just inside the tunnel, was an X in heavy red ink. Next to it, in small block letters, a single word: stop. I sat in my cruiser with the map in my lap, engine running, staring out at the quarry gate. I didn't call it in. Didn't log it. Didn't even write a note for myself. Because if someone wanted me to follow them tonight, they might want to try again. And I couldn't shake the thought. Sometimes your last shift doesn't end at the station. Sometimes it follows you home. The wind stung like needles the morning I drove out to Henry Ward's ranch. Snow had fallen overnight and turned the two-track into a white ribbon stretching toward the horizon. 27 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. The neighbor who called it in said Henry wasn't answering. Cattle were pushing through a broken fence, and the chimney had been smoking all night. When I rolled up, the house lights were on. A strip of warm yellow at every window, like a throat cut into the winter. The front door was pulled too, not latched. The porch boards held a thin scallop of drifted snow, untouched by footprints. Inside, heat. The kind that fogs your glasses and makes your eyelashes prickle. The smell of venison stew, salt, and thyme. A copper hint of the stock pot catching. In the kitchen, a bowl steamed on the table. Spoon on the floor. Chair pushed back just enough to look accidental. Henry? I kept my voice low, like I might spook something here. It's Sheriff Lucas K. Silence answered. Not empty, just full of the wrong things. The tick of the wall clock, the whisper of the furnace, the soft complaint of the stovetop stew at low simmer. I felt the shape of the room more than I saw it. My gloved hand hovered over the bowl. Still warm. Not hot. A window of a half hour, maybe 40 minutes. On the hall tree, Henry's parka, heavy enough to stand by itself, and his winter boots lined up beneath it. Keys on a nail. The only thing missing was the battered felt hat he never went outside without. The hat. And Henry. Dispatch, I said into my shoulder mic, keeping my eyes on the hallway mirror where my breath blurred me in and out. I'm at Ward's. House is occupied. Appears recent. No sign of him. Static. Then acknowledgement. Backup was 40 minutes away on good roads. These weren't good roads. I turned the stove off, slid the pot to a cold burner, and followed the house like it might tell me where he went. Bedroom neat. Bed made with hospital corners and a folded quilt. Bathroom sink wet around the drain. A damp ring from a shaving mug on the counter. Towel hanging crooked. Still the weight of it pulling toward the floor. He'd left in the last hour, and he'd left mid-bite. Outside again, I stood in the brittle light and listened. The cattle lowed from somewhere behind the barn. The wind carried the smell of manure and hay, and beneath it, something mineral and old, like wet stone. The snow in the yard was a clean sheet. No marks between the house and the truck. His pickup sat in the gravel, hood layered with frost. Keys were inside. If he went anywhere, he walked. I've known Henry since we were both boys who lied about our ages to make ourselves seem older than our hands. He did a stint as a wildlife photographer in his 20s. Magazines with elk on the cover, articles about patience in the blue hour light. And then he came home and silenced himself with a routine. He measured his days in fence posts and feed buckets. He liked things that stayed put. Nails, gate hinges, stars that returned to the same part of the sky. Out here, people vanish for reasons that aren't stories. Whiteouts, bad ice, a wrong turn and no cell service. But the house lights on, the stew, the parka. It wasn't weather. It was interruption. I circled to the barn. The big sliding door answered my push with a low groan that felt too loud for morning. Diesel and oil soaked the board so deep it had a sweetness to it. Tools lived where they always had, each in its hook outline. A shovel leaned wrong. Its blade was clean. The cattle were out beyond the corral, pressing a line at a section of fence scissored open and wired back. On the inside rails, snow had adhered and then slipped, leaving a smear like a dragged sleeve. I knelt, tracing the marks with a glove. 2 sets of prints in the drift. Henry's and someone else's. The other set was lighter, narrower, neat steps with no heel scuff. Not a neighbor. Not any boot I knew. My radio popped. Nothing spoken. Just a breath of static like someone thinking about it. I followed the prints past the corral to the equipment shed. In the far bay, behind a stack of hay, a plywood panel sat 2 shades too clean. I pressed. It flexed. Behind it, a narrow door with a simple hasp. A door I hadn't seen in all the years I'd come out here to sit on Henry's tailgate and not say much. I clicked my flashlight on and felt the beam tighten the air into a smaller circle. The door swung and showed me a steep set of metal steps going straight down, sweating with frost. The smell hit me before the cold. Old wood, damp earth, a vein of something ferrous, and that same stew herb warmth clinging to my coat. Henry? It was a name, but it came out like a test. No answer. Just the smallest sound of something humming. A low electrical thrum like a refrigerator in the next room. I took the steps, counting them without meaning to. 13. Turn. 13. More. At the bottom, a room only half finished. Poured concrete floor with the marks of the trowel still visible. Strings of bare bulbs ran along the ceiling, their cords stapled in careful lines. Against the far wall, 5 old wooden chairs sat side by side like a photograph of a family that wouldn't look at the camera. They faced an assortment of electronics. 2 VHS decks, a small CRT TV, a handheld recorder, a stack of tapes with Henry's tight block letters on their spines. Dates, names, 2 decades of them. On a work table, a Polaroid camera, film packs rubber banded, a notebook. The first page showed a grid and a key. Question 1, question 2, question 3. Photographic times. Notes about eye contact. In the margin, Henry had written, "Repeat until pattern emerges." I fed one of the tapes into the deck. The TV screen came alive in a wash of gray that resolved into Henry, 30 pounds younger, sitting in one of the chairs with his hands on his knees. He was looking slightly off camera. He asked questions in a tone I knew from when he'd show me prints he didn't trust yet. What do you hear at night? What did you think when you realized you were lost? When did you first feel watched? The person he was talking to wasn't visible. The audio picked up breathing, the scrape of a boot, sometimes an answer, a few words, never names. Henry would nod. He'd ask again, sometimes the same question, word for word, as if he needed sound to land in the same pattern. Tape after tape. The room didn't change. Only Henry aged. The questions stayed the same. The pauses stretched. On one tape, he leaned forward and touched the space where a hand might have been, like he was trying to steady someone. "Look at me," he said quietly. and whatever sat across from him refused. I stopped the deck and slid a more recent tape in. Last month. The label read only January, L. The screen jumped. An empty chair. The frame slightly crooked, as if the tripod had been nudged. No Henry. Just the hum I heard in the room. The lights too bright for the lens. The grain of the image furred at the edges. Minutes crawled by. Out of frame. Steps. Slow. Measured. A door somewhere up the stairs closing. A latch catching softly. Then a man's voice. Calm, with a breathy roll to the words like he'd learned to speak where wind was constant. "You're the last on the list, Henry." Another minute of nothing. No one sits. No one answers. The tape hisses. A chair creaks with nobody in it. The camera keeps watching the ghost of a room that isn't haunted, just occupied by absence. My fingers itched to stop the tape, but I kept it playing because sometimes you learn from what takes too long. At minute 41, the screen shivered like a snowflake caught on the glass. The voice again, closer to the mic this time, barely above a whisper. "You asked the right questions. Wrong people." The tape ended with a blue screen and a clicking noise inside the deck that kept going even after the video died. A small mechanical heart refusing to stop. In the stillness that followed, I became aware of the other sound in the room. Not the hum, not my breath. The faint scratch of pen on paper. From above, I clicked my light off on instinct and stood with the dark pressing my face like a hand. I moved toward the staircase, every step placing itself. The scratch of pen paused, then resumed, slower. At the top of the steps, the door's outline leaked winter like a seam. I eased it open to an inch. The shed smelled the way it always had, only sharper now, like someone had shaved something clean. Through the crack I could see the far end of the barn. A shape hunched at Henry's workbench, elbows in, head bowed. The old felt hat on his head, Henry's hat, tilted against the task. A gloved hand moved, pen scratching, not frantic, efficient. "Henry," I said, not loud. The pen stopped. The head turned half an inch, just enough to be listening. Then, like he'd decided the world wasn't a thing he needed permission from, the hand resumed writing. I pushed the door out and stepped into the shed's light. My boots whispered across sawdust. The figure didn't flinch, didn't finish, didn't hurry. He placed the pen carefully down, adjusted the hat brim, and stood, without turning. He wasn't Henry. He was a fraction shorter, shoulders set differently, that narrow neatness to his stance that matched the prints by the fence. He wore a dark coat with burrs stuck to the hem, and a scarf around his neck that looked borrowed from a colder place than this one. When he turned at last, his face was ordinary. So ordinary I would never find it again in a crowd. Clean-shaven. A fresh pink scar on the left cheekbone. Eyes a color that changed with the light. He looked at the badge on my coat, then at my hands, then at the stairs I had just come from. "You'll find the tape," he said, voice same as on the TV. "You probably already did." "Where's Henry?" My mouth was dry. I tasted the stew again, the cooked down salt of it. He glanced at the Polaroid camera on the table and then at me, as if we both knew photographs were worse than memories because they insisted. "He asked the right questions," he said. "Wrong people. Tell me where he is." My hand hovered an inch from my sidearm. I didn't touch it because I knew what touching it would do to the next 5 minutes, and I didn't want those 5 minutes. The man nodded toward the barn doors, toward the blinding field outside. He walked. A pause that wasn't confusion, it was punctuation. And then he kept walking. Tracks don't show that. They wouldn't. He almost smiled. "You're early." I took a step. He took none. The space between us filled with all the things this room had held for years. Questions, bad chairs, static. He reached for something on the bench without breaking eye contact. A photograph. He set it down where I could see. It was me, from behind, entering the shed 15 minutes ago. My shoulders hunched, my head tipped toward the hidden door like I already knew it was there. The image quality was soft, the light flat, but the shape of my body was unmistakable. I felt a double sense of it. The me in the photo, and the me looking at the me in the photo. Evidence and recipient. "When did you take that?" I asked. He tilted his head like he was listening to a faraway weather report only he could hear. "When you were looking at the stew." Movement outside. A ripple in the white beyond the open barn door. Wind kicking powder in a low drift. I stepped to block the exit. He didn't try to pass. He only stepped closer, close enough for me to see little flecks of hay clinging to his scarf. "You'll file a report," he said softly. "You'll make it easy to read, and then you'll stop." My hand finally touched the grip. He studied the motion like he'd seen 1,000 hands make it. A small nod, as if I'd passed a test he was giving me. Then he walked. Not to the door, to the wall. He slipped behind the hanging bridles and halters. A space I hadn't known was there. A sliver between studs. And by the time the bridles stopped moving, the space was empty. Nothing but wood and the smell of leather and the slow tick of cooling metal from the barn stove. I pulled the wall aside and found studs, insulation, no door. He had been there. He wasn't now. I went back down the stairs because sometimes going forward means returning to the place you didn't want to find. I took the January tape, slid it into an evidence bag, and pocketed the Polaroid of my back without logging it. The room felt newly empty, like the act of choosing had wrung the air out. Outside, the sky had opened into a pale blue that made everything else look colder. I walked the fence line to where the prints had converged. New wind had combed the surface. What remained looked like 100 deer had crossed, obscuring any two men who might have. I kept walking until there were no boards and no rails, and then there was just me, ankle deep in powder, the prairie pretending to sleep. Back at the house, I turned the stove on for a second, then off. I picked up the spoon and set it back on the table where it had been, as if I could rewind anything with placement. On the hall tree, I touched the parka sleeve and felt the cold soaked into it. Henry had left everything he'd need to survive a night like this, and gone out without it anyway. It takes a special kind of interruption to make a man do that. In my cruiser, I held the photograph against the steering wheel. The edges were still crisp from the cutter. The composition was competent. The subject was candid. The message was clear. Someone had been here watching my approach before I made it. Someone had expected me, and preferred I be early. I called dispatch and gave them enough. Missing person, probable voluntary departure under unknown influences, evidence of a hidden space. I left out the tape for now. I left out the picture of me that proved what timing can do to a mind. We say we don't keep things back in reports. We do when the thing we'd write down isn't ready to exist in the world yet. When I pulled onto the road, the ranch disappeared behind a curtain of blown snow. In the rear view, the house lights became a smudge, then a guess, then nothing. The Polaroid rode inside my jacket like a hot coal. It would make its way into my desk, then a folder, then the drawer that sticks in winter. On the drive home, I heard the man's voice again. Not because it was in my head, but because the radio carried a hitch of static that shaped itself the way his words had. "You'll make it easy to read. And then, you'll stop. I won't stop. Not because I think I can outwalk a man who plans his steps in other people's rooms, but because I know what questions do. They don't scare answers out. They sit and starve with them until only one of them is left. Somewhere out past the fence line, the snow is already filling whatever trail Henry made. Somewhere a hat I thought belonged to a friend belongs to someone who doesn't mind wearing it. And back in my office, when I slide the tape into a player older than the deputies who work for me, I'll listen to a room breathe for 41 minutes. I'll wait for a voice that tells me I'm early. I'll hold my own silence the way Henry held his, like it was a tool. Out here, the bad thing isn't the storm or the dark. It's the person who learns how to look like both and waits for you to arrive. Sometimes the quiet isn't hiding anything. Sometimes it's watching you decide whether to fill it with your name.